The fall nitrogen monoxide 1SAW. The Saturday morning sun spilled over the small coastal town like a warm blanket, gilding the sidewalks in gold. The air was filled with the easy rhythm of weekend life. Children laughing in the park, shop doors opening, with the cheerful ring of bells and the faint aroma of fresh bread drifting from the bakery on the corner. In the middle of all this was Harbor's End Cafe, a small, family-run place that had been serving pancakes and stories for almost 40 years. It was the kind of place where regulars didn't need menus and strangers were greeted like old friends. At one of the tables by the window sat a young woman named Vanessa Carter, wearing her crisp black uniform and a smile that looked easy, but carried the weight of someone who'd learned to make strangers feel at home even on her hardest days. She was a waitress here, known for her steady hands, quick reflexes, and the kind of laugh that could make a room forget its troubles for a while. Out on the street, two children were darting between tourists, identical twins, no more than 8 years old, their dark brown hair catching the sunlight like spun silk. They were chasing after a bright red paper plane that danced in the ocean breeze, each step full of the wild, unsteady freedom that only children carried. Their matching sneakers slapped against the cobblestones, their giggles rising above the chatter of the crowd. The paper plane dipped suddenly, carried away by a rogue gust, and the twins followed without a thought for the curb, the traffic, or the delivery truck turning onto the street ahead. No one noticed the danger, no one except Vanessa from inside the cafe. Vanessa's eyes caught the blur of movement, two small bodies rushing toward the edge of the sidewalk, the truck's massive grille glinting in the sunlight. She didn't think, she just moved. In a single motion, her order pad fell from her hand, clattering to the floor, and she was out the door. The world seemed to slow. She could hear the low rumble of the truck, feel the sudden rush of wind as it neared, and sense the fragility of the two small lives in its path. Her feet hit the pavement just as the twins stepped off the curb. She reached them in one desperate lunge, her arms circling their waists, and pulled them back with all the strength in her. The truck roared past, its horn blaring, the wind from its passage whipping her hair into her face. For a moment, no one breathed. The twins clung to her instinctively, their small chests rising and falling against her arms. One of them, the boy with a tiny scar near his left eyebrow, whispered something so faint she almost missed it. "Thank you." Vanessa's own heart was pounding, but her voice was calm when she spoke. "You're safe now? You're okay?" She crouched to their level, looking each of them in the eye. "Where are your parents?" The children glanced at each other, hesitating, and then shook their heads. That pause, that unspoken something, lodged itself in Vanessa's mind like a seed she couldn't ignore. Within minutes, the street came alive with murmurs. Passers-by began to realize what had happened, some offering praise, others scolding the children for running off. Vanessa guided the twins into the cafe, seating them at a booth away from the windows, her hands gentle but firm. She brought them water and a plate of pancakes, watching as they picked at the food but said little. She didn't press them. She knew that sometimes silence was the only safe place for frightened hearts. But inside, she was turning over questions. Why were they alone? Where had they come from? And why did they look at each other as if the answers were something they'd promised never to say aloud? As the day wore on, Vanessa kept checking on them between orders. The twins remained polite but guarded, their eyes following her every time she passed by. It was late afternoon when the cafe's bell jingled again and a man stepped inside. Tall, well-dressed, with the kind of quiet authority that turned heads without effort. His eyes swept the room until they found the twins, and in that moment Vanessa saw something flicker in them. Not just recognition, but relief wrapped in something heavier. She didn't know who he was, but she noticed the way the twins' faces softened, the way their shoulders dropped, as if a weight had been lifted. She couldn't have guessed then that this man was their father, or that saving his children had just tied her life to his in ways neither of them could yet imagine. The man at the door, the man stood in the doorway for a moment, framed by the fading afternoon light, and though he didn't speak right away, the cafe seemed to shift around him. Conversation softened, The clinking of cutlery slowed, and even the sound of the ocean outside seemed distant. Vanessa, still holding a coffee pot in her hand, watched him cross the room with measured steps. His suit was tailored, his shoes polished, yet there was nothing showy about him. His presence came from something deeper, something that made you feel he was used to being listened to without needing to raise his voice. When he reached the twins' booth, the children slid out of their seats and ran to him, their small arms wrapping tightly around his waist. He crouched to meet them, pressing his forehead to each of theirs in turn, and for the first time since Vanessa had seen them, the children smiled without hesitation. She set the coffee pot down and approached, sensing that whatever had just walked through the door wasn't just a grateful parent. "They're fine," she said gently as he looked up at her. "They had a bit of a scare outside. Almost ran into the street after a paper plane." His jaw tightened slightly, as if the idea of what could have happened was something he wasn't ready to picture. He rose to his full height, extending his hand. "I'm Adrian Blackwood," he said. His voice was low, steady, but Vanessa caught the faint trace of something beneath it: relief, gratitude, maybe even guilt. "Vanessa Carter," she replied, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, warm, and carried the weight of someone who had learned to trust very few people. "Thank you," he said, looking directly into her eyes. "You saved them. That's not something I can ever repay." Vanessa felt a little flustered under the intensity of his gaze, but shook her head. Anyone would have done the same. The truth was, she knew that wasn't always the case. Too many times in her life she'd seen people look away, pretend not to notice, or move just a little slower when someone else's safety was on the line. But she didn't say that out loud. Instead, she looked at the twins, who were now seated. Again, their small hands resting on the table as if nothing had happened. There was something about them, the way they mirrored each other's expressions, the quiet watchfulness in their eyes, that made her think they were carrying more than their years should hold. Adrian ordered something simple for the children and coffee for himself, but he didn't take his eyes off them for long. Every so often his hand would rest lightly on one of their shoulders, as though reassuring himself they were still there. Vanessa noticed how the cafe's regulars watched him, curious, whispering to one another, but no one approached. She wondered if they recognized him, or if his air of quiet authority simply made them hesitant. She didn't know yet that Adrian Blackwood was a man whose name appeared in financial magazines and whose decisions could shift markets. All she saw in that moment was a father who had nearly lost his children and was holding on to the reality that he hadn't. As the meal went on, Adrian began asking the twins gentle questions in a way that was almost casual, where they'd been before the cafe, what they'd been playing with, why they hadn't stayed where he'd told them. His voice never rose, but there was a current running through it, a kind of restrained fear that made Vanessa wonder how often this kind of thing had happened before. The children answered honestly enough, but always with glances toward each other, as if checking that their stories matched. Vanessa didn't know what to make of it, but she sensed there was a story behind their presence on that street corner, one that might take time to unravel. When they finished eating, Adrian paid for the food without even glancing at the bill, sliding cash across the table in a way that suggested both habit and a desire to be quick about it. "Thank you again," he said to Vanessa as they stood. "I meant what I said. If you ever need anything." He paused, taking a card from his wallet and placing it on the counter between them. It was heavy, embossed with his name, his company, and a direct number. Vanessa slipped it into her apron, unsure if she'd ever use it. People like him didn't usually cross paths with people like her more than once. But as he turned to leave, the twins looked back at her over his shoulder, their eyes locking with hers for just a moment, and in that brief connection, she felt something unspoken pass between them. She watched them disappear into the soft glow of the setting sun, the bell above the door chiming behind them. But long after they'd gone, she found herself replaying the scene, the urgency in Adrian's eyes, the way the twins seemed to communicate without words, and the lingering feeling that this was not the end of their story together. She didn't know it yet, but fate had just pulled her into a current that would carry her far from the quiet safety of Harbor's End Cafe, into a world where her courage, compassion, and instincts would be tested in ways she had never imagined. Strangers nitrogen monoxide MORE the days after the incident moved at their usual pace in Harbor's End Cafe, but for Vanessa, something had shifted. She found herself scanning the street outside more often than before, half expecting, maybe even hoping, to see the twins again. She told herself it was just human nature that anyone would want to know if children they'd saved were doing well. But deep down, she knew there was more to it. There had been something in the way they'd looked at her that afternoon, a silent recognition she couldn't shake. It wasn't gratitude alone. It was as if they'd spotted something in her that matched something in themselves. That feeling lingered like a song you can't quite place but know you've heard before. It was a Thursday morning when they returned. Vanessa was behind the counter, wiping down the espresso machine, when the cafe door swung open and the familiar chime rang out. There they were, the twins, side by side in matching navy jackets, their hair neatly brushed, their shoes bright. And new, Adrian was with them, though this time he didn't carry the same tension in his shoulders. Instead, there was a faint ease, the kind that comes from returning somewhere safe. The twins spotted her almost instantly, and the girl, slightly taller than her brother by half an inch, broke into a smile that made Vanessa's heart unexpectedly lift. They took their usual booth, and Adrian ordered the same pancakes for the children while he requested a black coffee. "They've been asking to come back here," he said quietly when Vanessa came to take the order. His tone was matter-of-fact, but his eyes softened for just a second before he looked away. "I think you made an impression." Vanessa smiled, unsure what to say to that. She glanced at the twins, who were now leaning toward each other, whispering something and giggling under their breath. "Well, they're welcome here any time," she said, meaning every word. As the morning unfolded, she noticed little things she hadn't before: the way the twins seemed to mirror each other's movements without thinking, how they took turns speaking as if they'd silently agreed on who should talk when, how their eyes tracked everything in the room like tiny radars. They didn't just eat, they observed. When Vanessa brought over their plates, the boy thanked her with perfect manners, while his sister slid one of her pancakes onto his plate without being asked, as though she knew he'd want more. These weren't just siblings. They were a team. One that had clearly learned to look out for each other in ways most children their age never had to. During a lull between orders, Vanessa found herself talking with them more directly. She asked about school, about hobbies, and got bits and pieces in return. They liked to draw, they loved puzzles, they hated math homework, but were good at it anyway. When she asked if they lived nearby, their voices dropped, and they glanced toward Adrian, who was on a phone call by the window. "Sort of," the boy said finally, his fork tracing lines in the syrup on his plate. "We move around a lot." His sister nodded but didn't add anything. Vanessa didn't press. She'd worked with enough people to know when not to push past invisible walls. It was only when the cafe was nearly empty that Adrian joined her at the counter to settle the bill. "They like you," he said without preamble, as if it was a fact worth stating, "and they don't like many people." Vanessa tilted her head, curious. "Why's that?" Adrian hesitated, his eyes narrowing just slightly before he spoke. "They've had a complicated few years. Some things they shouldn't have seen, places they shouldn't have had to live in." His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, a kind of restrained fury that made Vanessa think of locked doors and memories no one dared open. "They're resilient," he added, almost to himself, "but resilience comes at a cost." When they left again, Vanessa thought about his words for the rest of the day. The image of the twins running toward danger that first afternoon replayed in her mind, but now it was framed by something new, a sense that their story was far bigger than she'd imagined. She wondered what Adrian meant by complicated years, and why, if he clearly loved them so fiercely, there was still a shadow in his eyes every time he looked at them. She didn't know yet that the shadow had a name, and that it was coming for them again. That night, as she closed up the cafe, she found herself looking at the small card he'd given her, still tucked into the corner of the corkboard above her desk. She told herself it was silly to think she might ever call it but something about the weight of it in her hand made her slip it into her wallet instead of throwing it away. It was as though some part of her, the part that had leapt into the street without thinking, already knew that her path and theirs was far from finished. Trouble on the AOR Ione was nearly a week before Vanessa saw them again. And when she did, it wasn't in the warm glow of the cafe. The afternoon had been unusually slow, and she'd taken the opportunity to run a few errands before her evening shift. The streets were busy with weekend shoppers, and she was halfway to the bakery when she noticed the twins on the opposite side of the street. They were walking quickly, their small hands clasped tightly together, glancing over their shoulders in a way that made her slow her own steps. Something about their posture was different. Gone was the lightness she'd seen before. This was guarded, tense. She scanned the street behind them and noticed a man trailing several paces back. He was tall, dressed in an unremarkable jacket, but his gaze was fixed on the children in a way that sent an immediate chill down her spine. Vanessa didn't think twice. She crossed the street at the next corner, adjusting her pace until she was moving parallel to them. She wasn't sure what she planned to do, maybe just follow until she could be certain they were safe, but before she could decide, the man closed the distance between them. One of his hands lifted slightly as if he meant to reach for the boy's shoulder, and that was enough to propel Vanessa into motion. She cut across the sidewalk, placing herself between the twins and the stranger. "Hey," she said sharply, her voice calm but edged with warning. "Everything okay here?" The man hesitated, his eyes flicking over her in a quick assessment. For a moment, it was as if he was measuring whether she was a threat worth engaging. Then, with a muttered, "Wrong kids," he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Before she could take another step, the twins looked up at her, wide-eyed but silent. Vanessa crouched down to their level, her voice gentler now. "Who was that?" They exchanged a look, one of those silent conversations she'd seen before, and finally the girl shook her head. "We can't say." The boy added, "Dad told us not to talk to anyone about them." His voice trailed off as though he'd already said too much. Vanessa felt the weight of their words settle in her chest. This wasn't just a random moment. There was history here, danger that had already found them before and was now sniffing at their heels again. She offered to walk them wherever they were going, and after a moment's hesitation, they agreed. Their destination turned out to be a modest townhouse near the quieter end of the harbor. Adrian answered the door almost immediately, his expression shifting from relief to tension the moment he saw her standing there with the twins. What happened? His tone was calm, but it carried an undercurrent of urgency. Vanessa told him everything, not leaving out the way the man had looked at the children. Adrian listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening with every detail. When she finished, he glanced at the twins, then back at her. "You shouldn't have had to get involved," he said, though his voice softened slightly as he added, "But I'm glad you did." The twins went inside at his request, but Adrian stayed on the doorstep. For a long moment they stood there, the air between them thick with unspoken things. Finally, he said, "There are people from my past, from their past, who don't have good intentions. I've tried to keep them out of reach, but it's not always enough." His eyes met hers, and for the first time, Vanessa saw the full weight of the life he carried, the constant vigilance, the quiet fear, the knowledge that even the most ordinary moment could turn dangerous. "I can't explain everything right now," he continued, "but I owe you the truth. You deserve to know what you stepped into today." Before she could respond, a voice called from inside, the boy, asking if they could finish their puzzle before dinner. Adrian's expression softened just slightly at the sound, but the steel in his posture remained. "Thank you," he said. Again, and this time the words seemed heavier, as if they carried more than gratitude. Vanessa nodded, though part of her wanted to say she hadn't done anything extraordinary. Yet deep down, she knew that was no longer true. She had crossed an invisible line that afternoon, and once you crossed such a line, there was no going back. Walking away from the townhouse, Vanessa's mind replayed the scene in vivid detail. The man's eyes, the twins' grip on each other's hands, Adrian's unspoken admission that this was far from over. She didn't know why, but she felt certain she'd be seeing them again soon. And when she did, she suspected it wouldn't be in the safety of the café or under the calm of a sunny afternoon. Trouble had a way of returning, and this time she was no longer just a bystander. Inside the Blackwood HOME, the invitation came 2 days later, and it wasn't something Vanessa had expected. She was closing up the café, the smell of coffee still clinging to her apron, when her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but she knew before answering who it would be. Adrian's voice was steady, polite as always, but there was a thread of something else beneath it, urgency wrapped in restraint. "I was wondering if you could come by the house," he said, as if it were the most natural request in the world. "It's not about what happened the other day." "Not entirely, but the twins have been asking for you." He gave the address before she could protest, his tone making it clear he wasn't in the habit of repeating himself. When she arrived, dusk had settled over the harbor, the street lamps casting soft pools of light on the quiet lane. Adrian's home was larger than she'd expected, a blend of old-world charm and modern sharpness, its white stone walls edged by dark shutters and tall, narrow windows. The front door opened before she knocked, and Adrian stood there in a charcoal sweater and dark slacks, the kind of understated clothing that somehow made him seem even more formidable. But behind him, the twins were grinning, their faces lighting up in a way that dissolved some of the formality in the air. "We made a fort," the boy announced, tugging her hand before she could even greet Adrian properly. "You have to see it." They led her through the house, past a living room with high ceilings and bookshelves that stretched to the crown molding, past framed photographs that hinted at a life lived in many places, beaches, mountain ranges, city skylines. Though in all of them, Adrian's smile was rare and guarded. The twins' fort was in a den at the back of the house, made from an ambitious network of blankets draped over chairs, anchored by stacks of oversized cushions. Inside, they had a small pile of books, flashlights, and a plate of cookies clearly smuggled from the kitchen. Vanessa crouched to peek inside, and for a moment the danger of the past days seemed far away. Here, the twins were simply children again, proud of their creation and eager to share it. Adrian watched from the doorway, his arms crossed loosely, an expression flickering between relief and something more cautious. When Vanessa stood to join him, he motioned toward the kitchen, a silent request for a private word. The kitchen was warm and softly lit, the faint aroma of simmering soup filling the air. He poured 2 glasses of water and set one in front of her at the island. "You should know," he began, his voice low, "that what you saw the other day wasn't the first time someone has tried to approach them. It's why we move so often, why I keep my public life managed. There are people who think they can use them to get to me, and there are others who—" He hesitated, as if choosing his words with care. "Have reasons from before they were with me." Vanessa's brows furrowed. "Before they were with you? You mean they're not—" He shook his head before she could finish. "They are mine in every way that matters, but not by blood. Their mother was someone I knew, someone I cared about. She died when they were very young, and there were circumstances that made taking them the only option. But not everyone agreed they should be with me." His eyes darkened, and she understood without him having to say more. There were people who had challenged his right to raise them, and some of those people weren't above using intimidation or worse. The sound of footsteps interrupted them, and the twins appeared in the doorway, their cheeks flushed from playing. The girl carried a folded piece of paper and handed it to Vanessa shyly. It was a drawing, the 3 of them, standing outside the café, the sun bright overhead, the paper plane soaring between them. Above it, in careful block letters, they'd written, "Thank you for catching us." The simplicity of it caught Vanessa off guard as she felt a lump rise in her throat. "You're welcome," she said softly, pulling them both into a quick hug. She didn't see the way Adrian watched the moment, something in his expression loosening just slightly. They ate dinner together, a simple meal, but shared in a way that felt strangely like family. The twins insisted she sit beside them, peppering her with questions about the cafe, about the customers, about whether she'd ever flown in an airplane. Adrian joined in occasionally, his deep voice grounding the table's easy laughter. Yet even in those light moments, Vanessa noticed his eyes flicked toward the windows, the faint tension in his posture when a car passed outside. It was a reminder that peace here was a fragile thing, something that could be shattered without warning. When she finally stood to leave, the twins clung to her for a moment longer than necessary, and Adrian walked her to the door. "I know. I'm asking a lot by letting you in," he said quietly. "But they trust you, and trust is rare for us. I don't know where this will lead, but I think we're both aware it won't be simple." Vanessa met his gaze, and for the first time, she didn't feel like she was speaking to a stranger from a different world. She simply nodded, understanding that whatever came next, she was already part of it. As she stepped out into the cool night, the street felt quieter than it should have been. Somewhere in the shadows, she had the unshakable sense that eyes were watching. And though she couldn't yet see them, she knew trouble was drawing closer, circling the fragile circle they had begun to form. When the storm arrived, it was a Tuesday evening when the calm broke. The day had been gray and heavy, the kind of sky that promised rain but held it back, letting the air thicken with unease. Vanessa had just finished her shift and was walking home along the quieter stretch of Harbor Road. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and when she saw Adrian's name flash on the screen, a ripple of worry moved through her. He rarely called without reason, she answered quickly, but instead of his composed, measured tone, she was met with clipped urgency. "Vanessa, I need you to listen. Don't come by the house. Something's—" The line went dead, replaced by static, and then silence. Her first instinct was to turn toward her small apartment and wait for him to call back. But then she remembered the twins' faces at dinner, the sound of their laughter in the blanket fort, and the quiet way Adrian had said they trust you. That trust wasn't something she could leave hanging in the balance. Before she had fully made the decision, she was already moving, her steps quickening as the street lamps blinked on one by one. By the time she reached the Blackwood home, the quiet lane looked wrong. A sleek black SUV sat idling near the curb, its tinted windows reflecting nothing but the dim glow of the streetlights. The front gate was slightly ajar, something she had never seen before. Her pulse quickened as she pushed it open and stepped inside. The front door was unlocked, swinging inward with a low creak. The house smelled faintly of smoke, not fire, but the acrid bite of something electrical, short-lived and deliberate. "Adrian?" she called softly, stepping into the foyer. There was no answer, but she could hear movement, muffled, hurried, coming from deeper inside. She followed the sound, her shoes silent on the polished wood floor. It led her to the den where the fort the twins had built days ago was half collapsed, cushions scattered as if in a rush. And there they were, huddled together in the corner, eyes wide, faces pale. Standing between them and the doorway was a man she recognized instantly from the Harbor Street. The same unremarkable jacket, the same cold, assessing eyes. He turned. When he heard her, and his expression shifted just slightly, surprise, irritation, calculation all in one. "You shouldn't be here," he said flatly, as though she were an unwelcome interruption to a chore he meant to finish. The twins moved instinctively toward her, their small hands gripping her arm when she reached them. "We're leaving," she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her ribs. The man didn't move. His hand twitched toward his pocket, and in that instant Vanessa's mind went razor-sharp. She glanced toward the hallway, judging the distance, the weight of the twins against her. "Now," she whispered, and without waiting for a response, she pulled them with her, bolting past the man in a sudden burst of motion. He lunged, his fingers grazing the fabric of her sleeve, but she twisted away, shoving through the doorway and into the hall. The twins ran alongside her, their breathing quick, their steps light. She didn't dare look back until they were in the kitchen, where she grabbed the nearest thing with weight, a cast-iron skillet, and turned to face the sound of footsteps behind her, but it wasn't the man. It was Adrian, striding in from the side entrance, his expression a controlled storm. "Upstairs," he told the twins, his voice leaving no room for argument. They obeyed instantly, disappearing toward the staircase. Vanessa stayed where she was, skillet still in hand, as Adrian faced her. "You shouldn't have come," he said, but there was no anger in his voice, only a kind of grim relief. "He's gone for now, but this won't be the last time." She wanted to ask who the man was, why he was here, what he wanted. But Adrian's eyes told her that the answers were complicated, bound to truths he wasn't ready to hand over. Instead, he stepped closer, his tone softening. "You kept your head. You got them out of reach. That matters more than you know." The weight of those words sank into her, mingling with the adrenaline still rushing through her veins. For the first time, she realized she wasn't just a bystander who'd stumbled into their lives. She was now part of the line that stood between them and whatever danger hunted them. Later that night, when the police had come and gone, when the twins were asleep upstairs and the black SUV had vanished from the street, Vanessa stood in the kitchen with Adrian. The only light came from the low glow over the stove, casting the room in soft gold. "You could walk away now," he said quietly, as if offering her an escape she hadn't asked for. "This isn't your fight. You don't owe us anything." Vanessa looked toward the staircase, picturing the twins curled in their beds, safe for the moment but always within reach of the storm. She shook her head. "I think I do," she said. "Not because I have to, because I want to." Adrian studied her for a long moment, then gave a small nod, the kind of acknowledgement that felt like the closing of a deal, though no paper had been signed. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain that had been threatening all day. The storm had finally arrived, but in that kitchen, beneath that quiet agreement, there was also something else, the start of a fragile alliance, built not from obligation, but from choice. And in the days ahead, that choice would change all of their lives in ways none of them could yet imagine.